Good evening. All right. Welcome to our first in a two-part series of panel discussions. My name is Ryan Winters, and I am the Academic Advising Coordinator for the Honors Program at the University of Louisiana at Lafayette. My co-host this evening is Miss Jamie Carroll, who is a teacher at Mount Carmel High School and an Honors Alumni Board member. This evening's webinar is brought to you by the Honors Alumni Board, the Alumni Association, and the University Honors Program here at UL Lafayette. So tonight's panel discussion is about jobs, public sector jobs, and all of our panelists here tonight are representing a different number of experiences in the public sector job market. As well, all of our panelists this evening are honors program alumni. So we welcome our attendees this evening and also our panelists. To give you an idea of how this will work this evening, we'll be offering up 7 questions to our panelists about private sector jobs, and we will have a question and answer section available throughout the evening. If you have a question, we ask that you direct it at a particular member or about a particular topic to let them know who it is maybe that you'd like to ask that question to in the Q&A. We have Ms. Carroll's help wherein any answers we need to deliver or questions that come up, she will let us know in a timely manner as best we can, we'll get to them. And we also have a brief Q&A at the end to answer any additional questions. So there is a second panel discussion on March 31st at 7 p.m. on Zoom, and that one is for private sector jobs. So if you enjoyed this panel discussion, we ask that you share this with others, and also please feel free to attend that one as well. We hope that you enjoy tonight's panel discussion and get something out of it that you can use. We'll also have a brief poll at the end that it'll allow us to get some quick feedback. So let's get started by having the panelists introduce themselves. Tyler, would you like to introduce yourself first?
Sure, thanks, Ryan. Good evening, everyone. My name is Tyler Stavwalk. I graduated from the University of Louisiana in 2007. During that time, I graduated with a degree in history. I was involved in the honors program. I served on the honors board during my last few years in the program. Currently, I live and work in Washington, D.C. I work for the U.S. Department of State. Normally, I am a senior desk officer covering our embassies across North Africa, the Middle East, and Central Asia. And I say normally because within the last week, I got tapped for a detail assignment to be a special assistant in the Office of the Chief of Protocol, which reports directly to the Secretary of State. So this week has kind of been interesting trying to figure out how that all works. And learning that when the White House calls, you absolutely answer the phone. So nonetheless, looking forward to talking about my experience and talking about any questions you all have.
All right, thank you, Tyler. Okay, and now Emily Sandoz, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. So my name's Dr. Emily Sandoz. I'm an associate. I'm an associate professor. Sorry, it's a long day. I've been in front of Zoom since 8 this morning. So I'm an associate professor in the psychology department here at UL Lafayette. I actually just went up for full professor. So hopefully a year from now, I'll be introducing myself differently. So you could deduce from that I've been here at UL for 10 years. I'm working on my 11th year, but that was not my initial introduction introduction to UL. My initial introduction to UL was in 1998 when I started as an undergraduate. I got my undergraduate bachelor's degree in psychology at UL. I got my master's degree in psychology at UL. I taught adjunct in psychology at UL. And then I went away, got my PhD, and, came home because this is a lovely place to be. So yeah, that's me. I have some other jobs, board positions and such that might become relevant if we talk about nonprofit work. But my main gig is here at the university.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Sandoz. Okay, so let's see. Cory, Hebert, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, Ryan, thanks. Hi, everyone. My name is Cory Hebert. I graduated from UL in 2010 with a degree in philosophy. I have worked at or interned at several nonprofits and government agencies. From my very last semester at UL, I interned in Congress while I went to law school at Tulane and graduated in 2014. And since then, I have clerked for 2 different federal judges and spent a couple of years doing family law at Acadiana Legal Services. Right now, I'm back working for clerking for a federal judge here in town. So I've got some internship experience and then some work experience with nonprofits and government agencies. Yeah, any law-related questions that people want to know about working in the public sector versus the private sector. I don't know about the private sector, but maybe in the public sector, I can provide some wisdom a little bit.
All right, thank you so much, Cory. So we have a group of folks here who are more than willing to answer questions as we go. Like I had mentioned, we'll have the Q&A, and Jamie Carroll, who is our co-host, will be helping with that this evening as well. So to start off, I'd just like to ask, what does a public sector job mean to you? And Tyler, I'll pass it back to you.
Sure, Ryan, thanks. And one sort of disclaimer that I will give from the get-go here, as a current federal employee, is anything that I share here, these are my own views. Nothing that I say should be a reflection of current policy within the administration. And those are just some of the ethics rules that I have to follow. So I think to answer your question a little more directly, Ryan, for me, a public sector job has manifested in 2 different ways in my life. I actually served 6 years in the United States Air Force. I joined in March of 2001, and then September of 2001 happened. And the whole plan of join the military as a way to pay for college became a more uniquely interesting experience in a lot of ways. Because, October, November of 2001 was when we invaded Afghanistan. Later that year was when the United States invaded Iraq. And so for me, that was kind of a very different experience. But public service was always something that I wanted to do. I knew that I wanted to live in DC. I knew that in an ideal world, I would love to work for the State Department. And that is where I work now. So, I think you talk to anyone who, truly believes in public service, and that concept of, our oath is to support and defend the Constitution of the United States is really a sacred charge that I think most of us take very seriously. And of course, there are certain realities, like you can make a hell of a lot more money working in the private sector. But you also get to do some really amazing and really cool things in the public sector. For me specifically, I have traveled to 62 countries around the world, many of them places that I would probably never go as a tourist. With my current job, I am getting to be involved in calls with the White House, with the National Security Council, with the Secretary of State's office. So yeah, I think in a nutshell, maybe in a roundabout nutshell, that's sort of what a public sector job means for me.
All right, thank you so much, Tyler. All right, Dr. Sandoz?
Yeah, so a lot of academics, a lot of professors you're pretty much going to work in the public sector. You're going to work at a public university, although there's certainly private universities, and we might think of those as private sector jobs. For me as a clinical psychologist, though, there was a bigger decision, right? Am I going to be sort of in private practice or work for a hospital or another kind of agency providing psychological services? Because I do actually have a private practice, but is that going to be my main gig, or is my main gig going to be in the university, in a university? I think there's some really lovely things. I'll admit, I had to like Google and see like, is a university public sector job? Because you really don't necessarily think of yourself as a government employee all the time. But the lovely things for me that sort of pointed me towards, academia, for those attendees in the room who are thinking about that path or trying to decide between, we would call it like professional practice versus a research or academic career. For me, it's just an incredible amount of freedom and creativity. There's something different when you have to eat what you kill, is the way we say it in private practice. So every hour that you're not spending with a client in front of you, you're losing money that has to go to your rent or to your utilities or to whatever. So in that comparison, I have a lot of security. My kids are taken care of. I've got benefits. To me, a public sector job meant that. It meant security. It meant long-term. I'm tenured. I can stay at UL as long as I want, as long as I don't do anything like really terrible. I can stretch out. I can change my expertise. So, I have enough of a cushion to where I can change from one kind of work, for example, to another kind of work. If I was in a private university on what we call soft money, where my position was grant funded and I had to get grants to literally pay my salary or my benefits or so on, then, the kind of research I do might be guided, instead of being guided by student interest and the thing that they're really excited about, or bringing in clinical training that's really hot and new and interesting to my clinical trainees. I would have to follow the money, basically. So for me, a public sector job was about not having to follow the money when it comes to my actual, my actual work and what my day-to-day looks like.
Thank you so much. All right, I'll pass that same question along to Cory.
Okay, and as another federal employee, I'll follow Tyler's lead and give the disclaimer that none of my views or anything I say here should reflect the opinions of the federal judiciary or the judge that I work for. Although I can't think of anything I'm going to say that he would object to, but just in case. I think for me, a public sector job means, that whether something is a public sector job or not, generally by how it's funded. If it's government funded, then usually that means it's a public sector job. And that could mean you are working for the government directly, or that could mean that you are working for a nonprofit that is funded in large part or entirely by the government. And usually that means that you are either working for the government or on behalf of the government to provide services, which is what the government is there to do, whether it's security or education or free legal services for people who can't afford them. It's the point of the public sector is it's not private. You're not working for private gain. You're working for the public gain, trying to do something trying to achieve a public good rather than a private good. So I think just to echo what the others have said, it's you get to do really amazing things, and you have a certain amount of freedom. And then you also can know that you are doing something for the public, you are part of something bigger, and you are there that you can provide, so that you can provide something good for people, and maybe, make some change beyond making a profit. No, which is not to say that making money is a bad thing, but the ultimate goal being profit versus the ultimate goal being, maybe helping if you can, or working through a system or changing a system, depending on what your job is. I think that's really for me what the public sector means. It's that ability that you will be able to have maybe large scale change, or contribute to large scale change. Maybe not do it yourself, but you'll be a part of part of the system. We as a country, this is us doing things individually on behalf of us, the nation, for our fellow citizens. So I think that's what a public sector job means to me.
I wanted to just echo one thing that Cory said that I think students don't always get. You know, you interface with faculty all day, and you might know vaguely that they do research, but one of the things that I always tell my students, again, just kind of echoing what Cory said, is that, you know, science is a public trust. You know, the public funds us, you know, my labbies, my research assistants, the students in my lab, you know, that every person that pays taxes is funding that. So the work that we do, you know, needs to be guided by the needs and resources that are sort of apparent in our community. And I think people don't always kind of think about that. So thanks, Cory.
What a great point. So I think that we've answered that question very well. Does anyone have anything else they'd like to add to that? Okay, well, I have another question here. So what were some of the challenges that you faced when applying for a public sector job? That includes things like assessments, time management, communication, applications, any of those things you have to do on the way in the door. I'm going to start with Dr. Sandoz because you were the last one to speak, so we'll start with you.
Well, so the first thing that came to mind, honestly, was something that I haven't even mentioned yet. And that's that before I had this gig, when I was sort of still moving through all of my clinical training, my residency and so forth, I worked for the VA. And boy, background checks, you know, all of that, all of those details, and making sure that I'm a safe person, that I'm not trying to hurt anybody, that I'm, you know, not a criminal trying to harm our veterans. That was substantive. And this is even for, you know, internship, postdoc kind of work. And that was in the context of clinical training. You know, I think some of the burden there, of course, is with good reason. But it does feel like with public sector jobs, there's a form for everything and an acronym for everything and some layers of, you know, things that's the way it's always been done, that nobody really knows exactly why it goes this way or that. I mean, for me, it's worth it. Like I said, some of the stability of the system that I get to work within, you know, some of that commitment to the public good, all of that is worth it. But the thing for me is the tedium. I mean, the tedium of paperwork that comes with any bureaucratic involvement. And, you know, so I get to stretch out in my lab and in my science and be, you know, creative and wonder things. And then I get to fill out a bunch of paperwork about, you know, if I have some other kind of job or accounting of all of the little bits of the budget or things like that. And I know you asked specifically about sort of applying and accessing there. But to me, that part, it sort of stretches out, not just through getting the job, but sort of maintaining it and keeping up with it. Again, for me, worth it, but certainly in stark contrast to the exciting sort of science and teaching of it.
Absolutely. All right, so I'm going to ask the same question to Tyler. I'll pass it forward to Tyler. What were some challenges that you faced when applying for a public sector job?
So I will definitely agree with Dr. Sandoz on this, and I think especially because I work within the national security infrastructure, both when I was in the Air Force and now at the State Department. Background checks are a real thing. And, you know, the more sensitive information that you are granted access to, the more thorough the background check is. You know, so one thing I would encourage kind of right off the bat, because, you know, as we're talking, I think good to kind of provide recommendations and solutions. If you are thinking about applying for a job within the federal government, start going back and documenting your address history for the past minimum 5 years. If you're planning to go for some high-level job, minimum 10 years. Be able to document all the dates that you traveled somewhere and who you traveled with and why you went there. If you've ever had problems with finances, be prepared to provide documentation for that. You know, if you've ever been late on your taxes, you know, or you got audited by the IRS, you know, whatever it may be, like these are all things that will come up. And this is not something at my agency that is done. But for example, I have friends who work in the Justice Department and, or in the intelligence community, and they have to sit through polygraph examinations for their jobs. And that's just part of the reality. So I think that's one thing. Another thing is just the application process period. It does not happen quickly. It is a cumbersome, challenging process. And writing your resume for a federal job is just a completely different experience than writing your resume for a private sector job. I think going through school, all of us are taught, oh, your resume should be a concise, well chopped 1-2 pages at the most. Like if you're getting 2 pages, I don't even know how someone's going to read that. And granted, I have been working for the State Department since 2010. All in all, I have at this point about 20 years of work experience. But my resume, that when I apply for a job on USA Jobs, like if I'm trying to get, a new job or a promotion or whatnot, and I have to go through that USA Jobs process, my resume is 12 pages long. And that's because of the way that you have to write a resume for a federal job. Everything is about metrics and narratives and details. And it's just a completely different process. But I think another thing that I would say is both a challenge, but I think for those of you who are interested in public service, in a job in public service, also a big opportunity is there is about to be a big shift in the federal workforce, especially. And I don't know these numbers for the rest of the federal government, so I'll speak specifically to my agency. Within the next 5 years, 50% of the workforce in the Department of State is eligible for retirement. If you look at the leadership ranks, I believe it's more like 60% is eligible for retirement. And part of why I bring that up is one of the challenges that the government kind of continues to deal with. And, it's an innovation challenge. Things are done in older ways, kind of outdated ways. I got really excited a couple years ago when we got Windows 10 on our computers. And I think that this was like 2016, 2017. But that's just kind of the speed at which the government works. So like you have to learn to be patient with those kinds of things. But I also, I say this because, again, I think there's about to be a massive wealth of opportunity to come in and how are we going to build the future of work and the government of the 21st century? So yeah, those are a few thoughts.
Thank you, Tyler. It's very interesting that statistic you threw out. That is really fascinating. All right, Cory, same question.
Yeah, I don't have a lot else to add. I'm also in the federal government, and my, I've the background check and security clearance thing. Clerk, I've interned in Congress and for a war crimes tribunal for the UN. I've worked for 2 federal judges and applied to take the bar exam, and each one of those requires a background check. So it has I've gotten used to it, but it has not gotten less tedious or time consuming. But at least now I have a database of where I lived and all my parking and moving violations for the last 15 years. So, at least there's that. Yeah, it really is a slow thing. And, for public sector jobs, I think all of the extra paperwork and all the extra time comes down to the fact that Congress allocates money for specific things, and they want to know where every dollar goes and make sure that whoever hired you can justify why they spend it. So it is tedious and time consuming. And I guess I understand the theory behind it, but that doesn't make it any less of a drag on the ground, so to speak, to actually do all the documentation and, fill out the 50 pages of applications and scan. Thank God technology has made it so much better. And the USA Jobs site has a is a site where you can create one profile that you can use to apply for all federal jobs. So that was not something that I was familiar with until I had gotten into one job and then was looking for others. But before that, it was just sort of apply to an agency individually. And now there's, there's one consolidated place where you can apply for all federal jobs. So that's the technology and the internet and being able to scan things and sign them and send them back in an email rather than faxing or getting things mailed. That all helps a little bit, but the extra time and expense because of the intense accountability is it's definitely a thing. And so, like Tyler said, you want to give yourself a lot of lead time when you're applying. Don't leave it till the end if you're doing for a federal job. I assume it's the same for state jobs. I can't imagine that Louisiana especially is more efficient than the federal government. I might be wrong about that when it comes to hiring, but so that I would just prepare for background checks and security clearances if you need that sort of thing, depending on the job you're going for.
And I think one other important thing to add is when you start going through this process of security clearances, when you select people to advocate for you and speak on your behalf, they should be people who are going to do that well. You don't want to, like, if you're having someone validate your residence, like I lived at this address for this period of time, you don't want it to be a crazy person that those investigators are going to talk to and be like, maybe we don't want to hire this person. So those are, I think, things to be mindful of as you're going through some of these security clearance processes is, choose articulate people who are going to speak well and speak succinctly about you.
This is some excellent advice. So does anyone have anything else they'd like to add to that question?
I guess the only thing that I would add is, for anybody thinking about academia, like who might want to be a professor, I just realized like it's probably kind of a mystery how it is that we apply for and get those jobs, because it's not sending an application and then maybe doing an interview. You complete an application, maybe you get invited to do an interview, but then you also likely have to teach a class or do what we call a job talk, where you're doing a professional presentation of all of your research and what kind of things you might teach. Not only do you have your curriculum vitae or your academic resume and your application, but you have a teaching statement and you have maybe a diversity statement and a research statement and a cover letter. And so when you do job search, like when you finish your doctorate, you're kind of maybe your postdoc and you're kind of out on the market. I mean, job search might be applying to, 17 jobs across 12 different states. And you kind of have to be ready, because academic jobs are at such a premium. You kind of have to be ready to like go anywhere and do anything. So a lot of people in my position who have the option of maybe being a clinical psychologist, in a hospital or private practice versus going into academia, a lot of people end up making the decision to not be in the public sector because of the limitations of where they can land in academia, where there are jobs. We make the joke that somebody has to retire or die for an academic job to become available, similar to judgeships or other positions that are tenured positions that people kind of keep for life unless they go somewhere else. So if you're in a good department, then you don't leave unless until you retire or die. So those can be really competitive jobs, and the application process involves a lot of them kind of trying you on and you trying on the department to see if it's a good fit.
Also valuable advice. Thank you. Okay, so I think we should move on to the next question, which is about the challenges that you face day to day currently in your job. And if not challenges, the other side of it is, what is the weirdest or most bizarre experience you've had? It could be in your current job, but it could be in another public sector job that you had. But so it's one of those two, either just challenges that you face or something bizarre or weird that you faced. Let's go ahead with Dr. Sandoz. We'll start with you.
I was trying to put on I'm still thinking about this face. I I probably should have answered the questions in my head before the panel. I think the most challenging thing about academia for some people is actually kind of a plus for me. And I guess I'm doing that interview thing where they ask you about a weakness and you tell them a strength instead, but say it like it's a weakness, like a little humble brag. So sorry, but it's the constant changing. So just like being in college, where every semester you have 6 new bosses that want 6 different things from you, and you have to adapt your whole life to this brand new schedule and all these different requirements. And then the semester's over and everything starts all over again. You have to adjust again. For faculty members, it's kind of like that. I mean, it's not as bad as that, because we teach the same classes, over time and stuff. But really, like every few months, you have a full reset. So that, if you're the type of person who wants like a linear progression of your work, where you're, it's kind of ongoing, one day follows the next, and your career sort of progresses in this linear fashion, like something about the university schedule doesn't really foster that. You do something, and just as soon as you're like, oh, I'm kicking butt in this class, I know exactly, oh yeah, I'm gonna do it like this, like it's over, and you're not gonna teach it again for another 8 months. So you have to like take notes and be like, okay, at the end I had some really great ideas of how to run that. Like I said, for me, it's something that is awesome. Things have to move quickly to hold my attention. I like a lot of stimulation. I like a lot of new things. I like to be constantly changing. So for me, I think that thing that can be a challenge for some people, and having that kind of circular progression and those kind of repeated bits, for me, that's kind of lovely. I tell my research students, like, I hold the lab and y'all all move through it. Y'all move through it, and I'm here like watching that as you kind of cycle through. And as far as crazy things, I think you just really never know what you're going to get when you make yourself available to students. Again, for me, maybe I'm an eternal optimist, but that's kind of a lovely thing. I like to be super accessible. I like to have my door open. I sit in Zoom office hours these days and just like wait for people to show up and like come want to talk to me. I'm of course answering emails and stuff, but but being accessible and, being sort of there as people are struggling through a pandemic or just college life as depending on the year, it means that you can end up playing all sorts of roles in people's lives. And I saw something similar, I think, in my work as a psychologist at the VA is, part of that stability and part of having a commitment to the public and to your community at large, is that, folks might believe you when you say you're there for them, and they might need all kinds of different things from you, which can be, both a challenge and can put you in some odd positions as you're trying to serve. So I guess part of it depends on how seriously you take service and how much you think of that as part of your work.
All right, that was a great answer. So Cory, I'm going to go with you next. What are your interesting experiences that you've had, or maybe some challenges that you've had?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I haven't been able to think of anything that is maybe a challenge that stems from the fact that my job is a public service job. It's just, it's got all the challenges of a normal sort of this kind of clerking for a judge comes with its own set of challenges, in the fact that every day you're dealing with a new kind of case and new kind of law that you have to quickly get up to speed on, so that you can even understand what the parties to a case are saying, much less figure out who is correct, or maybe neither of them is correct. And so that's sort of the day-to-day challenges. That there's always an incredible workload, and because people are always having disputes and filing things, and they need to be resolved. In my previous job as working for legal aid, doing family law, doing divorces and custody, I think the challenge there was really getting a glimpse into the darkness that a lot of people are dealing with in their family lives, the pain and suffering that domestic abuse, and just the kind of stress that divorce can, and the things that lead up to a divorce can can impose on people and children. That's, you know, that's I'm sorry, that's not funny, but those are the challenges of that one. But again, as some of the other panelists have said, you do really, you know that you are doing something really bigger than yourself, and you're really have an opportunity to help these people. So in terms of weirdest or bizarre things as this job as a clerk, I mean, really the weirdest things that we get are the arguments that people who are representing themselves make because they are not lawyers, and the law is very confusing and very hard to follow, and especially for people who don't have any training in it. So those things, you know, can be those can be pretty funny sometimes. Usually especially if somebody has been to a lot of lawyers and been told that no one wants to take their job, but they want to do it anyway, we get to see why exactly other lawyers don't want to take those jobs. So there's that. So it's, you know, it's a little bit high stress, a little bit high pressure, but it's a variety. And man, clerking is 90% research and writing. So if you like research and writing and just sitting at a computer screen or going to the library and just reading and regurgitating and then using that to come to a decision, that's please, you know, go on USA Jobs or look for state court clerkships. You will have to go to law school first, but that's fine. It's just a quick 3 years in and out. So I think that's it.
You're making me want to rethink what I do. I want to nerd out in the library. That sounds wonderful. All right, Tyler, back to you with it for the same question.
So I think to sort of pick up on what some of Cory was saying, you know, it's work that has a real impact, and you know that's a great opportunity, but also it's a challenge because it's work that has a real impact. So not the current job that I am detailed to, but sort of, you know, what is my more full-time job. So I began my current role as a senior desk officer covering the Middle East, North Africa, and Central Asia. I began that job in February of 2014. And when I began that job, I was covering embassies across Africa and across Europe. And 3 embassies in particular that were in my portfolio were in the countries of Sierra Leone, Liberia, and Guinea. And those countries may not seem like they have any particular significance, but in April, May of 2014 was when the 2014 West Ebola crisis broke out. Something where eventually Ebola started to appear here in America, and there were a lot of very real concerns about it becoming a global pandemic. What we didn't know, you know, then that I wish that we know now. Anyway, I won't digress on that, but you know, all of a sudden, like, I had been on this job for a couple of weeks, and I'm having to coordinate with the Department of Defense because we are, you know, coordinating with them for airlift support to get the U.S. Public Health Service there. We're having to coordinate with people at the airports with our, you know, host nation like counterparts and liaison folks to try and figure out how to get this public health response spun up. Because unless you're dealing specifically with like a combatant command, at the end of the day, the presence of the United States in any country, and when I say combatant command, I mean like the Department of Defense where we are actively engaged in conflict, so like Iraq or Afghanistan, for example. But most everywhere else, the Department of State is the front line of any U.S. government engagement anywhere. It's this thing called Chief of Mission Authority. And so that means that like there are things that matter, and there are lives that are on the line. You know, some of the other things that I've worked on, you know, within the last 2 years, one of the countries in my portfolio is the state of Israel. And when the decision was made to move our embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, that wasn't something where you just snap your fingers and it happens. That's a massive, you know, personnel, staffing, resource, facility, shift in how things work, how those things are secured, where people live. There's just a lot that goes into that. I was actually in Bishkek, Kyrgyzstan when coronavirus really started to blow up. And, I came home, we were working, in our office for about another 2-3 weeks. And then that's when coronavirus really blew up in America and really started to blow up everywhere else. And where this became, impactful for us was the State Department is also involved in what's called American Citizen Services. So, for all of you who have a passport, your passport is the US Secretary of State requesting your admission into whatever country you're going into. And so when you, as an American citizen, are abroad, the State Department is there in case things go badly. So for all these US citizens who were in all these countries all over the world, all of a sudden the State Department had to figure out how to repatriate most of those people, or in other words, get them back safely to America from wherever they were. And so some of that was, chartering military flights. Some of that was chartering commercial flights. Once we got people home, how long did they need to quarantine? Where did they quarantine? What airports were willing to take them? Were those governors, willing to take the risk of bringing in a whole flight full of people that may have been infected with coronavirus? So, yeah, and I mean, some of this may be, again, because I work in the national security infrastructure, but, when you're working in public sector jobs, like, it really is work that matters, whether it's, working at the State Department or working in the court system or working at a university. You're really directly impacting people's lives in a very real way. And there's an awesome power and also an awesome responsibility for that. And sometimes it's kind of scary because your work has a very real impact, on how the country functions, how the world functions, and how people live their lives. Like, someone messes something up in a jobs report, and that can have a direct impact on the stock market. So yeah, that's sort of a rambly answer, but there you go.
Aren't those the best answers, though? I will also ask, was there anything bizarre or weird that you want to add? If not, that's okay.
Oh, I mean, sure. Like I'm in my mid-20s and I'm given a passport and told, like, go to West Africa and go figure out this problem. Or, like, go to Central Asia by yourself and help them, get this issue under control. And you experience some crazy things along the way, but like sometimes you get shot at by pirates, or sometimes you get hustled by terrorists. Like, these are things that sometimes happen, but like, those are the stories that make it a worthwhile experience. And you're able to just kind of begin a story like, well, this one time when I was haggling for carpets in Ashgabat, Turkmenistan. And that's not often a way people get to begin stories. So those are just the fun realities of the job sometimes.
Sounds very interesting. So any other responses to that question before we move forward?
Ryan, before you move forward, on that note, with Tyler, what he was saying about having some of these, people skills to deal with some of these situations, we had a great question in the chat, kind of going back to the resume question. Are there any specific skills that one should highlight and or strive to sharpen in order to stand out for a public sector job? So thinking about maybe some of the situations that you all have had to deal with, could there be anything perhaps maybe that comes to mind as far as skills or things to work on?
So right off the bat, something I would definitely touch on that Cory has already touched on is be an effective writer. Like, be able to write well, be able to effectively communicate your ideas, use good grammar, proofread the things that you actually send out before you send them out. So much of your success in the public sector and I'm certain that Cory and Dr. Sandoz would echo this, is just being able to write well. So that's one I would definitely lead off with.
I would, yeah, absolutely. Being able to write well, at least in the legal context, it needs to, I mean, you need to be able to write clearly and concisely, because the people that you are working for, and I guess the overall, well, the first thing that came to mind was, if you can, develop the ability to get into a situation, come to terms with it quickly, and adapt to it, because and get rolling yourself without needing a whole lot of hand holding. I don't know how you know, unless you, aside from just throwing yourself into just go to Turkmenistan and see how you do. Throwing yourself into situations, I'm not sure how you develop that skill. But the one common thing to all public sector jobs, I think, is that people are overworked and don't have enough resources to handle what their jobs are. So if you want to do a public sector job, you are going to be inundated with work, and it's going to be tough, and you need to not get overwhelmed by finding out how much you are expected to do and on what timetable, but to just come in and say, okay, I'm here and I'm going to do the best that I can. Let me read everything, and then read everything I can, get to work, ask questions, because that has been a core thing that has helped me be successful, is to ask the people that I work with and my bosses. And sometimes I have to fight past the fact that I know they're irritated at how much I'm asking. They don't say it, but I know deep down, if they really admitted it, they would really hate for me to stop asking questions. But they keep answering questions because it shows that I'm interested and trying to learn. And then eventually, if you ask a whole lot of questions at the very beginning, then you can get up running yourself, and then you can stop asking questions and start handling your own business, because everyone is just kind of overwhelmed all the time. So that's one thing I would do, aside from clear, concise writing. You can find, you know, there are plenty of writing guides about how to write well, and you leave out extraneous verbiage, things like or or like I keep saying. So those are the two things that came to mind about what skills it would be good. And, you know, you can't highlight that on a resume. On a resume, maybe, you know, lots of different, maybe public service. If you can show on a resume, maybe that you volunteer in ways that show an interest in public service, maybe that'll show that you are actually interested in it as a mission, and not just as a job. But that would be the thing that I think would help, that would have helped, that did help me and would have helped me earlier, is that ability to just come in and not wait to be told, but to just sit there and just voraciously read and do, as you know, get as much information as I can to get up to speed.
Did you have something, Tyler?
One thing I wanted to touch on that Cory brought up, and I promise I'll be quick. This is always my challenge, is, you know, growing up in the South, you just become a fairly verbose person, and you start talking about things you're excited about. But Cory mentioned, like, read voraciously, and I could not agree more with that. For me and my job in particular, I consume news and information on a constant basis, and I don't have a singular source that I get it from. In the course of a day, I get my information from the Washington Post, the New York Times, CNN, BBC, Al Jazeera, various Asian news, African news networks, you know, Central and Latin American news networks. I'm not remembering all of them because I have them saved, so I just go to those sites. I read The Economist on a weekly basis. I read Foreign Affairs on a weekly basis. And that's all relevant to me. But whatever your field is, especially in the world of a public sector job, like, read voraciously, consume information constantly, like, be able to speak with authority and with expertise on whatever it is. And I think also be a creative problem solver. You know, Cory has talked about how, you know, working in the federal government or working in the public sector, like, you know, the budgets are what they are, and sometimes they go up and sometimes they go down. But, you know, the more often, like, you know, if you go to your boss, if you go to your supervisor, whoever, with a problem, be prepared to offer a solution. And that may not be the solution that's implemented, but it shows that you took the time and you thought things through. And to some degree, like, thought, how would we approach this? And the more creative you can be, the more effective you're going to be in being able to work like collaboratively with other people who are facing some of the same constraints, but everyone has that same dedication to achieving the mission at hand.
Yeah, and I'll just build actually directly on that, Tyler. The thing that I was thinking that I do think is actually accessible, for college students or other community members that might be looking to kind of repurpose or change careers. There's this idea of kind of being able to consider the functional impact that you want to have. So when a problem occurs, what you see is the problem. You see everything that's wrong and all of the costs that it's going to have, and that's sort of what's most salient. And what you can do, and a skill that you can develop, is just sort of be able to see that problem in terms of that there's a need that needs to be filled, being able to see that need kind of functionally, or that problem more functionally, to ask yourself, what are the functional characteristics that a solution would have? What are the boxes that a solution to this problem should tick? And then looking at the resources that you have, how is it, I'm going to assume that there's 10,000 ways to solve this problem. Some of them are going to match the resources that I have, and some of them won't. And if you have that idea of a functional impact, and you can kind of on your own look at the resources that you have, make good use of what's available, and use that to address and solve problems. I want you on my team every time. Some of the things, that really impress me when I'm sort of supporting students or mentoring people in their professional careers have they sort of independently led projects, even something like guiding, like being an officer in a club or being in a research lab. If to the extent that you can detail that part of what you did in that is lead a fundraising campaign, or that part of what you did in that is, design a whole little thread in the program of research that your faculty members continuing to pursue. If there's something that you're walking around in a group that you're involved in, even something to scale like the university or your community, and you go, what somebody should do, then, do it. And then put it on your resume, and then tell people about what you did, what you learned, and what you would do differently if you had the opportunity to do it again. That is, like I said, I want that person on my team regardless of what's going on. They can lack the expertise. I can teach them, how to use statistical software, but if they don't know how to use resources that they have to solve problems that are going to come up along the way, then, it'll be faster to do it myself. Frankly.
And I think to offer one other piece of advice that kind of like jogged my memory, this was something that one of my mentors gave to me early on, and it's something I've tried to kind of hold true to throughout my federal career, is be curious. Curiosity breeds vulnerability, and vulnerability breeds authenticity, and authenticity breeds courage. And when you're able to harness the different aspects of those attributes, that's what helps make a difference when you are focusing on serving others. But the root of it all is being curious. And I was born and raised in Louisiana. I grew up in Louisiana. Louisiana is a wonderful place to be born in and grow up in. There's not a day that goes by that I don't think about crawfish boils or, a fried shrimp and oyster po' boy from Old Time Grocery. Like, it's great, but there's this whole big, broad world out there, and so much to learn and so much opportunity. But if you are not willing to demonstrate curiosity, then it's just going to be hard for you. And so I think, if nothing else, I think my main message for tonight, like, if you hear nothing else I say, is like, be willing enough to be curious, because what that breeds for you as a person, beyond like opening yourself up to that, is always going to pay dividends for you.
These are great suggestions about skills to garner. And I just wanted to say that I noticed that all of them have a similar thread. And in a lot of ways, it is a continuous nature of being curious. So I thought that that was a good place to put a punctuation mark on it and move forward, because that was a very good point. And everyone that has been sharing this evening, I know all of these different things you're sharing, they come from experience and from having, had issues or things that didn't go well. So I know that one of our questions is, what is your most important piece of advice for students when they choose a public sector job? Because sometimes there may be some red flags or things that you see that kind of tip you off that maybe that's not right for me. And I think you were talking about skills, and I kind of thought it might be a good place to bring this in, because it might be connected in some ways where maybe the skills don't match the job or things that you experience like that. So I'm going to leave that up to I guess I'll start with Cory. I'll go ahead and ask Cory first.
Okay. I mean, if you are, I think that the first thing to do when you're looking for any kind of job, including a public sector job, is you can have a general idea of the kind of thing that you might want to do, and then see what's available. Several of my jobs have not been because that I've had, and that have been the most enriching and the most life-changing, I suppose, have been because I just looked at, I knew that I wanted to do a certain kind of thing, and then I went and looked at a relevant job board and saw that there was an opening. And I didn't necessarily have a passion for that thing, but I was open to it and I was able to find some way to see it. And when I saw the opening, I thought, oh, actually, yeah, that has the potential to be really good. And then I applied for it, ended up getting it, and it was incredible. It wasn't that I had, when I interned in Congress for Congressman Bustani, it wasn't that I had some lifelong passion for working in government, but I got an email from the political science department, and they said, hey, we're doing this thing, does anybody want to do it? And I said, yeah, that would be cool. I'll go live in DC for a bit, sure. And it was incredible, and I'm so glad that I did it every day. And just those sorts of things that, I mean, yeah, even though it's not, if I limited myself to say, no, I want to be an astronaut, and so I'm only going to do things that are astronaut related, then I would not have had this experience. I would have had other experiences that would also have been great, but that would have been shutting off to these other possibilities. So, just circling back, just echoing the idea to be curious about things. And with public sector jobs, I mean, like we said, as long as you're okay with having to learn a lot of new things very quickly and be overwhelmed, but also know and be making less money than you would be otherwise. But be open to the possibility that this will be, this could be the start of a new career. This could be the start of something that will, you'll make lifelong friends potentially, or start a whole new career, or just get you ideas that, if you work at a thing for a little bit and you figure out that maybe it's not what you want to do, it's also beneficial in that respect. So I would just pick a general idea of a thing that sounds fun to do, and then, maybe either a thing that sounds fun or a thing that you would feel cool saying to other people that you did. Those are usually the two things that I have, start there and then go and see what's available. And then if there's something available there, go with one of those. And if not, go with, the nearest thing you can, because you will be able to find something important. And if it's public sector, you will be having an impact somewhere. Some red flags. I'm not really sure about red flags in, that are specific to public sector jobs that wouldn't be that wouldn't also apply to private sector jobs. If there's a whole lot of, if there's a lot of turnover in the people who had your position before, or if the job posting says we are a family and we expect you to act like a family, so that where that really means you're going to be working nights and weekends for no extra pay, because a family wouldn't ask for extra pay or whatever, those sorts of things. So yeah, I'm not sure about red flags in choosing public sector jobs. Maybe somebody else has something.
I don't know if mine is particular to public sector jobs either. I had to Google whether or not I had a public sector job. But what I always tell students is I think that sometimes when you are the person without a job, so you're between jobs or unemployed, or you're just fresh out with your degree, you're in this like really, really vulnerable place. And you just assume that you will be happy. Anybody that will take you is going to be good, and that you're sort of, the one man down, sort of that in that position. And while it's certainly important to be deferent, respectful, and all that, I mean, I tell students, when you're interviewing, like you're interviewing them, you're asking yourself, could I be happy here? It's really hard to imagine when you're applying for a really competitive job or a position in a grad program or something like that, to imagine that somebody might make you an offer and you'd be like, nah, I'm good actually. And like, you need to be ready to say no if something's not a good fit. I remember going to kind of an extended interview experience that involved like a bunch of dinners and, all of these social things that are intended to entice you. And I had been to another interview previously, and I actually saw a person there who had also interviewed at the other place. And I approached her saying like, didn't you interview in this other place? Didn't I see you there? And we weren't, feeling competitive. So we sort of chatted about it. And I assumed that she and I would be feeling very much the same way, which was that this place was sort of stuffy and artificial, and everybody was sort of kind of seemed backstabby and not very nice. And she remarked on how unprofessional and casual everyone was in the other agency, and how she just felt this was so much more professional and so much more her style. And it was so sort of, oh, you're not everybody, Emily. There's like, some people think things that you don't think. It really was quite mind blowing. I'm sitting there like, how soon can I get out of here? And she's sitting there like, phew, this is such a better fit for me. So like that little bit, like if it's a red flag, it's probably one that's like showing up inside of you, and trust that and get a sense of, could I thrive here? Do I want to hang out with these people? Is this a place that if everything goes wrong in my life, suddenly the world spins in a way that, there's a pandemic, for example, are these people that I could say, listen, I need some, time to handle this for a while? Does it seem like I could connect with people there? Are there people that I want to collaborate on if I have a cool idea or a project? I mean, I'm very kind of, relationally oriented. I'm a psychologist, but if you're a people person, if your social community, if your village matters to you, then, when you approach that sort of application process, look at the people, look at your shared, the extent to which you have shared values, shared understandings, the extent to which you could see those relationships deepen. You don't have to be everybody's best friend, certainly. Certainly I'm not, but mutual respect, mutual support, and a shared sort of sense of community and values. So remember that you're looking for that, and no coming from you needs to be on the table. You need to be prepared to say, I just don't think this is the place for me. And if they don't get that and you get that, then that's a red flag, I think. So.
I'm going to kind of continue the theme of different things that both Cory and Dr. Sandoz have said. So I think one thing I'll say from the get-go is be open to the experience. Never label like duties and responsibilities as something that is beneath you. I mean, I'm a veteran of the U.S. Air Force. I'm a GS-13 like senior officer in the federal government, and I have opened doors for people. I have guarded bathrooms for people. Like I have printed off copies of things. Like there is no task that is beneath you, but always strive to be clear on what you are wanting for a career trajectory. The first job that I had in the State Department was a job that I applied for and I came in off the street. But the job that I have now, the detail that I am doing, in both cases, these are things where I volunteered for things. In some cases, things that I didn't necessarily want to do, but I recognized that there was an opportunity and there was potential there. But also, I networked. And in the world of the public sector, networking is something that is so crucial, because you want people to, like, just as I said, like when you fill out this application for a security clearance, like you want to have people, good people who are going to advocate for you on things. Like your network is the same thing. Like you want to have people who know you and can speak for you. And when other people call to ask about you, those people are going to vouch for you and help, like, advance opportunities for you. When you are interviewing, and it gets to the end where they say, well, what questions do you have for us? Like, don't sit there like some bump on a log. Like, ask real questions. Like, do some research before you go in there. Be prepared to ask questions, to help determine whether or not that job is right for you. Like, I know for so many of you who are students, like maybe you don't think about things like this right now, but you want to ask questions like, what is work-life balance like in this office? Like, how does that work? If I need to take vacation, is that going to be problematic? Like, if I'm wanting to start a family, am I going to be frowned upon for that? How do you measure success in this office? Like, those are important things that you want to be able to ask, because those are real adult questions that, you are going to have to deal with those realities at some point. I think another piece of advice that I would offer, and I say this with all due respect to my dear mama, and I know we all have a mama out there, but form your own opinions of people based on your own experiences with them. People interact with people in different ways, and while your reputation matters, take the time to get to know people as individuals rather than what you've heard about them. One person that I never heard great things about, but I worked with that person and he was one of the better bosses that I've had. And he's helped advocate for me getting this detail that I currently have. So I think those are things that are important to keep in mind. And, again, read voraciously, like consume information constantly and be prepared. When it comes, like when you're given an opportunity to ask questions, like always have questions to ask. And as Cory said, yeah, sometimes people are going to be annoyed by that, but also not really, because that shows that like you were a good investment and you care. Because I think at the end of the day, when you were asking questions about something, it means that you care.
And I'm sorry, I did think of a potential, maybe not a red flag, but something that Dr. Sandoz said earlier that that is a thing to consider when looking for a public sector job, is that in some, like academia, there are some jobs and some, it might be a specific bureaucracy or a specific job that where there's not really a whole lot of room for progression, because there's one person at the top. There's one senior manager, and that person is going to be there until they die. And so it sort of blocks everyone below them from moving up. So if it's the kind of thing, if you're looking for a career where you do a lot of progression, you might not want to look, that might not be what you're looking for, because you will only have one stop, and then you're just going to be there at the entry level for 20 years until that person leaves, or most likely dies, because they won't leave. So yeah, I think all of those things, and yeah, for sure, public sector jobs are not immune to the backbiting and interoffice politics and gossip, and just like anywhere. I mean, the stereotypes about government workers being lazy bureaucrats. It's not that it has no truth; it's a stereotype for a reason. There are those people in every level of bureaucracy, and with government jobs, it can be harder to dislodge them than in than an at-will private sector. So those things are, that's not a red flag about public sector jobs. It's just something to think about. You know, it's being effective in a public sector job means riding the line of being very idealistic and optimistic, but also very practical and grounded, and not being surprised, not being too disappointed when people don't live up to what their potential is. Or maybe if you feel that they didn't live up to it. But I think that the thing that happens where one person is stuck, or there's a group of people at the top and you can't really ascend the ladder, I think that's more likely to happen in a public sector job than in a private sector job, where people can move around, or move to other places more easily if jobs are available.
Excellent. I think that everyone's answers slowly revealed all these different things to think about. It's kind of surprising the amount of things that go into the decision about choosing a job, specifically in the public sector. And as Tyler mentioned, and Emily also mentioned, it can be basically anywhere. Like, it can kind of go for everything. Same with Cory, you were saying that as well. It can, you can use these for different things, but that was interesting, the last thing you said about the fact that in some jobs people tend to stay for a while and to look and to check to see what sort of openings there are, because it can be very, I guess, stuck, like a sort of stuck situation where, yeah, you can apply for it, but maybe it's not something that seems as realistic, because that opening that's there, it's an opening. So, you know what I mean? It's one of those things where it's like, it may be there, may not be there. Someone could stay in that position. They were supposed to retire, but they decided to stay. That happens a lot. So adding on to that, a lot of the other questions that I had, they were basically answered as we talked about these things. So kudos to all of you for being able to kind of intermingle a lot of your answers. Yeah, it was well done. So what I want to do now is open up the floor to a Q&A. Just give everyone an opportunity to put some ideas forward. If you have any questions that you want to ask our panelists tonight. We had such a great question about the skills. And I think it's so important to look into that. I really appreciated that question. So anyone else who has questions, feel free to put them up right now. And while that's going on, I will in a second launch a poll for those who are still here. I'd like to get some feedback on tonight's panel discussion as well. So if you have a question, it's here for you. Does anyone want to add anything to what we've talked about tonight so far, just to kind of riff or on an idea or something you're interested in expressing for students?
I think the only thing that I would say is, if there's a faculty member that you connect with, that you think has neat ideas, or you like the way that they run their class, like, find out what else they do. I think sometimes we transition from high school to college and we sort of see our faculty members as teachers and don't understand, I only spend, God, maybe 6 hours a week, 12 hours a week in front of a class. The rest of the time I'm reading journal articles, doing statistical analyses, meeting with students, doing clinical work, doing clinical training. A lot of my day looks nothing like standing in front of a class teaching or grading. In fact, I can offload a lot of the grading and administrative stuff on graduate assistants. So, when I think specific to academia, find out what folks that you connect with and you think like, wow, what's that person spend all their time doing? Because they look really happy and engaged. Ask them what their day is like, what their week is like, what they like about their jobs, what they don't. I think there's a lot of what we do when we interface with students that isn't visible, and students are generally not well socialized to what academia is even. So if somebody's not an instructor, like if they're on the professor track, then they're probably doing a bunch of other stuff that you don't have any connection with as an undergraduate student. And a lot of that, I love to teach. I know not every faculty member does. I love to teach, but the stuff that I do outside of the classroom, even if it's meeting with a couple of undergrads about their interests, like that's the stuff, like that's the bread and butter of my work. That's the thing that makes it really hard to leave academia if I ever wanted to.
I think one other thing I might add as sort of a kind of wrap up, because people who are interested in working for the federal government, especially like, I work for state, and so people will always ask like, oh, how do you get into that department? And especially so in Washington, D.C., that question comes up. But in general, I think if you are interested in a career in public service, especially in the federal government, you have to find those ways in. And yes, we shared USA Jobs, and I'm sure that the other panelists will agree that, like, while it has improved, it is still a pretty awful system. And it is still sometimes very demoralizing applying for jobs through there. But part of how I, for example, was able to get in is that I was a veteran. I had served in our armed forces, and so I had veterans preference and eligibility points that gave me that extra edge. And I don't raise the concept of military service because everyone will be in the infantry, and the infantry is an important job to be done within the context of the armed forces. But there are research jobs, linguist jobs, law enforcement jobs, intelligence jobs. Like, there is a wide gamut of jobs available under the banner of the armed forces. And that's always going to be an avenue to give you an in to getting into the federal government. But also there are all of these other programs that exist. For State Department in particular, if you are considering being an intern and coming to live and work in DC for a summer or for a semester, there's the Pathways Internship program. I would encourage you to look that up. If you are interested in going to grad school and then doing some kind of fellowship program, for example, there's the Presidential Management Fellowship program. There's the Pickering Fellowship program, the Wrangell Fellowship program. So there's all these different ways in. You could consider doing something like joining the Peace Corps, which, I know lots of people who have done the Peace Corps, and they've lived in some crazy places and done some crazy things, but every single one of them would describe it as one of the best 2 years of their life. And then when you come back, you have this magical thing called non-competitive eligibility that allows you to apply for jobs, and other people can't really compete against you for those jobs. If you have a penchant for languages, look at something like the Boren Fellowship, where the U.S. government will literally pay for you to go live abroad for 6 months to a year in a whole host of countries to focus on learning, a particular language that is a critical need within the national security infrastructure. So, again, to kind of touch on this theme of be curious, like, look for those different ways to help get you in. And I think most of what I'm saying is more specific to the executive branch. I don't have any experience in the legislative branch or the judicial branch. Cory, are some of those same avenues applicable for legislative and judicial?
Yeah, I'm not sure about fellowships that people can use to get into them or that sort of thing, but absolutely, networking is especially in the legal community, it's a big part of how people get jobs. And applying is great, but very demoralizing, and you'll have much quicker success if you know people. I mean, I know people who just they had a particular interest. They found a person they looked on firm websites in whatever city they were living in, found one person who was interested in that, listed that on their website, and just emailed that attorney and said, hey, I'm looking for a job. I am just out of law school. I would like to find out more about what doing this kind of law is like. And they ended up getting a job through that connection. And there are, I mean, it may be lawyers do have there are bar associations and bar foundations at the state and local level. So if you're interested in talking to lawyers, that is the place to start, is with the Lafayette Bar Foundation and the State Bar Foundation, to see if it's possible to talk to people. So it can be it can be hard to get that job or to get started on your career, but absolutely making inroads with people. And if you are able to say to a person who is in the community, I'm interested in X, they can say, oh, I know somebody who's interested in X, and then point you there, even if they are not. So I think any sort of career field, the legal field, anything like that, it can, from the outside, it can feel like you're up against a brick wall and like you're trying to find a way in. And people are absolutely the way to do that. So I'm not saying hang out at bars until you see somebody who looks like a lawyer and then, try to chat with them, but there are worse ways to get into things. So yeah.
Picking up lawyers, huh? So one of the things that we were talking about earlier was skills. I was wondering if there's any other skill that you thought of since we were moving forward. I think that networking skill, as you're suggesting, is part of it, definitely. Any other ones?
Yeah, I was just going to say, we talked a lot about written communication. I think giving yourself experiences where you have to talk to a lot of new people, where you have to tell people what you're about. In my area, it's what's your research interest, what's your program of research. I tell students they need to have a 2-minute version, a 10-minute version, and like a 3-hour version where they can have those conversations. There's little things about being able to connect with folks. Cory said he's not telling people to go to the bar and try to pick up a lawyer, but when I'm bringing students to conferences, when we get to be in person, there's a lot more happening in the bar between sessions. That's where the real conference is. You get up and you do your presentation, but then it's connecting with the person on the way out the door when they say like, man, I had some interest, I had some questions about your analysis. And, whether you're drinking or not, you're sitting down and geeking out about data or a clinical intervention. And those relationships, it's almost like summer camp. Like those relationships are seriously significant. One of the things that I love about my job is, I have colleagues all over the world. The pandemic has affected me, I think, differently than a lot of people, because a lot of my closest connections are people that I see online anyway, that we're chatting on WhatsApp or Zoom already. I've traveled to Europe for a friend's wedding right before COVID, and I met him in 2008 at a conference as a student. So I think that networking skill and being able to talk to people confidently and authentically, as Tyler brought up earlier, about what it is that you do, about what it is that you're interested in, and almost unapologetically, if that's not their bag, then you won't connect, and that probably wasn't a good networking kind of node for you anyway. That might not be your person who's going to advocate you, and if you got to kind of squash yourself to make that networking connection work, then that might not be the path for you. So yeah, I think the oral communication, the ability to connect and build those relationships is, at least for me, that seems super important.
I think another thing that I would say is be willing and able to speak truth to power when offered the opportunity to do so. In DC in particular, there's a lot of powerful people that you see on the news on a daily basis here. But ultimately, they are going through some of the same struggles that you are about trying to figure out what is the right decision and what is the right choice. And granted, they have a much bigger, kind of a much bigger, set of parameters that they're taking into account. But when people in positions of power ask you a question, you need to be able to give an answer to that, because again, it kind of goes back to what I was saying about, if you're going to raise a problem, be able to offer a solution. And the solution that you offer may not be what ultimately is implemented, but nonetheless, it shapes the process, and it shapes, the thought, the thought that goes into whatever final solution is made. And look, in the world of public sector work, like there's a lot of thankless work at times. There's a lot of like, oh, is this a good benefit for the taxpayers? And sometimes it's easy to get discouraged. But what I ultimately count as a success for me is at the end of the day, when I go home, when I call it quits at the office and I go home, did I make some individual impact towards the progression of foreign policy for the United States? And there has not been a single day in my State Department career that the answer to that question has been no. Just as I said, be curious, be willing to speak truth to power when given the opportunity, and learn constantly. My grandfather was a big proponent of the belief that the day that we stop learning is the day that we die. And I think that is one of the things that for me is the most true, because I think if I ever were to stop learning, that to me says that I am no longer curious as a person. And I think if you are no longer curious as a person, then you are not necessarily contributing to society in a positive and progressive kind of manner.
I'm sorry. When my attention got caught by a. This is just changing topics. I'm sorry. It was just a thing that I saw that someone asked or said that it's important for students to understand the difference between a job and a career, and to maybe distinguish those to get people in the right mindset. I think it's important to know the difference between a job and a career, but you also don't necessarily know before you get into it whether something is going to be a career. It's something that looks like just a job can turn into a career if it turns out that you really love it and are good at it. And going into I think going into a job interview or a job search with the idea that you are trying to find your career, like many people have said earlier, it just sort of, it shuts off possibilities because maybe you don't want to have a career as a janitor, but maybe the janitor job can lead you somewhere else and into somewhere else on the career. So I think it is important to know the difference between a career and a job and be able to think about them. But necessarily, I don't know. Certainly, I have not yet. I'm 35 and I still have not. I've not landed what I want to be when I grow up. I haven't gotten to a thing. You can say that I have a legal career because I've got 7 years this year of experience being a lawyer in various jobs, but at various positions. But it's not that I started out with a goal in mind and this is where I'm going. And I think that a lot of people are in the same boat where they get to a thing or maybe a first job that they really decide they can take to, and then that ends up being a career. So I think that's important, but students, I don't think should go into the job search thinking, okay, now is time for me to find the thing I'm going to be doing or to get on the path I will always be on, because it just doesn't work that way for many, many people.
So fun fact, when I started at UL as an undergraduate, my major was actually electrical engineering. And then I took some math classes and I got a D in calculus. And I was like, I don't think I should be engineering a damn thing because that's going to be some bad engineering. But I could not agree more, Cory. Like I have had many jobs in the pursuit of a career. And I know kind of where I would like to go in the next 5 years, but ultimately when I go to retire, ideally from the federal service, I don't really know what the final thing is that I'm going to be doing. And that's kind of exciting and that's kind of fun. And I think, gone are the days of, our parents and grandparents, where, you went to school, you got a job, you did that job for 30, 40, 50 years, you got a pension and you retired, and that was it. We live in a much more globalized society. And I think the more that you can be open and, curious and vulnerable to what those possibilities might be. And I know I keep mentioning this word vulnerable, but like, I think it's something so important for us to be more accepting and discussing. I'm getting the thumbs up from the professor who studies this, so I'm gonna guess I'm on the right track. We don't need. I think so often we put up these walls, and those walls, in a lot of ways, I think we think, oh, we're protecting ourselves. But also in a lot of ways, we're keeping other people out and we're keeping opportunities out. And I think the more often that if you open yourself up to curiosity and you open yourself up to vulnerability, you open yourself up to opportunity. And, sometimes having the attitude of like, why not? Let's see where the road takes me. Like, never in my life, never in my career have I had that approach and been disappointed in the results. Has it led to some crazy moments in life? Sure, but that's what makes good stories and a fun experience. But being open to like what life throws at you, like you never really know where it's going to lead, and where things are going to go from there. I was flying to Abuja, Nigeria for 2 weeks. 2 very sweaty weeks. Like, y'all think it's sweaty in Louisiana? Like, there's some real humidity in Nigeria. Like, it is crazy there, y'all. And I saw an article about someone who worked in the office of the chief of protocol. And, I enjoy things like, giving meaningful gifts and writing letters and knowing that the details matter. And so on a whim, I just reached out to this person. And that person helped me network into this detail that I am now doing. So, like, don't be afraid to reach out to people. The worst that someone can say is no. And if you've never reached out, you don't have that answer at that point anyway. Give them the opportunity to say yes, because it can lead to a lot of really awesome opportunities and experiences in your life.
I wanted to also speak to the sort of job career distinction. I think sometimes, one of the things that I noticed in our students is that a lot of our students have to work, and maybe in ways that we don't think about as being kind of a traditional college experience. So it might be that they're paying their tuition. It might be that they're, paying to live or supporting children. We just have a lot of students that I think the median number of employed hours is like 30 or something for our students. So our students at UL work, many of them, and sometimes they have this sort of sense of like, this is just a job, which I get, and like, I'm doing this job so one day I can do my career. What I encourage students to do is like, look at every job opportunity as an angle of what could I learn there? What could I do there that I might be able to cast or spin as preparing me for my career? It may be that there's a difference between, this retail job and that retail job because of what I'm selling, or between this volunteer position and that volunteer position because of the kinds of needs of that organization. So I often invite students to sit down with me or other people that know them and sort of get some loose career ideas, and then start thinking about, okay, if you're going to work for $7.25 an hour, maybe $15 an hour in 4 years. But if you're going to work for $7.25 an hour, then like, at least I want it to be not just paying your rent, but also sort of you're investing in yourself. You're building, opportunities and things that later you can put on your resume. It might not be the name of the organization that stands out. It might be that you led employees in a particular effort or initiated a particular piece of work, or it may be that you have an interesting story that nobody would expect from that kind of job. The other thing I want to say is that, like, people, I feel like millennials get a lot of flack for wanting to do something that they're passionate about. Like, everybody's like, F your passion, you know, pay your rent and like get your head out of the clouds. You need to do something that, you know, that just pays the rent, you know, that gets you through to the next day. Why do they expect to be so passionate? And I've been sent like articles on that theme, like we should be advising students to forget the idea of being passionate or having a job that they care about. And I just wanted to comment that, you know, all of us do very different things, and all of us are like, we do work that matters, and we know that it matters every single day. And every conversation that we have, we try really hard to make it matter. You know, I think I'm on the cusp of Gen X and millennial, but you know, that's the stuff, man. If I can pay my rent and do a job that really matters to me, that's important. If I can raise my kids, you know, and I'm gonna work harder and be more creative and more engaged and more excited and more vulnerable and more accessible and better at talking and communicating if I'm doing something that I really care about. You know, I will be exceptional if there are things that matter to me that I'm working for. So, you know, it's okay. It's okay if you don't want to do a job or a career that you're passionate about. That's fine, like no judgment. But if you feel pressure to let go of the idea that you might have a job that you're passionate about, or that you might be able to do things that really matter, you know, tell them I said it's okay. You know, a psychologist said that's a like really great way to live your life, turns out. And there's good data around that. So it's not just my opinion.
Always good to be backed by data in almost anything.
Well, I think that we've reached a point in the evening where we have definitely covered a lot of different things. I see there's a question about transferable skills. Very briefly, I just want someone to maybe take that and just see what they can do with that, because I'm not sure quite what that entails, but maybe someone can answer to that. The question is, can someone speak on the importance of transferable skills?
So I know one thing that all three of us have touched on that I think is definitely going to be within that bucket of transferable skills is effective writing. And I know we keep coming back to that, but you know, being able to write effectively, having experience in managing budgets, like even if it's like a small budget, like, oh, I managed a budget of $500. Like, sure, I began managing a budget of $500, and now I manage budget line items equitable to $150 million. Being able to analyze information. Again, being able to write effectively, like, you know, some of these things that I think a lot of people are kind of dismissive of as, you know, quote unquote, soft skills, those are going to be some of your transferable skills that really matter as you go from job to job throughout your career progression.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, writing is great, but it is the specific instance of communication in general. Effective communication, whether it's verbal or written, is just so important. Being able to not just to get all of the relevant information out in the question quickly and clearly, and to also know how to reach the person that you're speaking to where they are so that they will be able to hear it, and know what, you know, when you're speaking to a supervisor, you need to know what that person is thinking about and what they have to balance against what you're asking them to do and what the considerations they need to make are. Just that in general, I mean, that's going to be the core transferable skill that, I mean, I don't know if you can get a job being a hermit, being a silent hermit, but that's the only one that you will not have to use communication as a skill. So that one, being able to navigate politics without getting too bogged down in them, and communicate effectively, I think those are going to be the core transferable skills that will apply to any job. I mean, it really just depends on what you're transferring from and to. Otherwise, I'm not sure what the with a comment or question had in mind of transferring from what job to what other job, but those are all going to be doing budgets is going to be, if you're in a budget heavy field, doing budgets is going to be a transferable skill that will stand you in good stead. But if you're going from budgeting to digging ditches, then that might not matter so much. So it's a little case dependent.
Well, I think we've once again kind of answered the questions that we had and have reached that point in the evening where I would say that we've hit on a lot. We have a lot of information for students. This was being recorded for all those who were here and participating. You were able to see in real time, these answers to these great questions from our audience. And then ultimately, I just want to thank all of our panelists for coming this evening and being so gracious to give us a good chunk of their time and answer with so much vulnerability and curiosity and good oratory. So putting those skills to use. And of course, I want to thank our co-host, Jamie Carroll, who was excellent in jumping in when it was needed. Absolutely. Most important part of the help that we have available to us. So thank you all for coming. I hope that you have a wonderful evening. And once again, because it is honors, I'll finish it off with Per Sapientiam Felicitas, which is, of course, through knowledge, happiness. So all of you have a wonderful evening, and I look forward to our next panel discussion, which will be on the private sector, which is coming up March 31st. So if you'd like to join in on that, we'll have the link available. But once again, thank you all. Have a wonderful evening.